The world rarely throws away broken machines. It throws away misunderstood ones. The words drifted quietly through the morning air as Ethan Carter eased his aging pickup truck through the rusted gates of Miller Industrial Salvage on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The place smelled of warm steel, old rubber, and rain that had dried beneath the early summer sun. Mountains of twisted metal stretched toward the horizon, while forklifts groaned between rows of forgotten machines that once carried someone's greatest ambition. Ethan had not come searching for treasure. He had come looking for affordable replacement parts that might keep another family's old car alive for a few more years. Running a small neighborhood repair shop as a single father meant every dollar mattered. Every customer trusted him because he repaired only what truly needed repairing. And every evening he returned home, knowing honesty had paid fewer bills than shortcuts would have, but it had allowed him to sleep peacefully. His 12-year-old daughter, Lily, sat beside him holding a notebook covered with neat sketches of engines and gears. She looked toward a fenced storage area where 6 massive wooden shipping crates rested beneath faded weatherproof covers. Large red letters across each crate read, "Disposal Authorized." "Dad," Lily asked softly, "why would someone throw away something that big?" Ethan slowed the truck without answering immediately. Years of engineering had taught him that the first answer was rarely the correct one. He climbed out, brushed dust from his denim shirt, and quietly walked toward the crates. A salvage worker noticed his curiosity and laughed. "Those things," the man said, "biggest waste of money I have ever seen. Prototype engines from Hayes Mobility. Failed every test." The company finally gave up. Ethan remained silent. Instead of staring at the engines themselves, he focused on the identification plates bolted near the crate openings. His eyes moved slowly across the stamped serial numbers, production dates, revision codes, and calibration markings. Something almost invisible caught his attention. His expression never changed, but Lily recognized the look. It was the same look her father wore whenever he found a puzzle nobody else had noticed. "Can we see one?" Ethan asked politely. The worker shrugged before pulling back one heavy cover. Inside rested an engine unlike anything usually found inside a scrapyard. Even covered with dust, every component reflected remarkable craftsmanship. Nothing appeared cracked. Nothing looked abused. It simply looked abandoned. Ethan carefully examined the wiring harness before reading another small identification label hidden beneath a protective bracket. He took one slow breath and smiled, almost imperceptibly. The worker folded his arms. "Still interested?" Ethan nodded. "How much for all 6? The man blinked in surprise. "All 6? Ethan nodded again. "Every one of them." The worker chuckled loudly enough that another employee glanced over. "You know they're dead, right?" Ethan gently rested one hand on the nearest crate. "That is what the paperwork says." "And you disagree?" Ethan looked toward Lily before answering. Paper can describe failure. It cannot always explain it. Several employees exchanged amused smiles. One quietly whispered that the mechanic was wasting his savings on expensive scrap metal. Another shook his head, convinced the quiet father simply did not understand what he was buying. Ethan never argued. He never defended himself. He simply asked the office to prepare the paperwork. An hour later, the 6 engines were secured onto his worn flatbed trailer as curious workers watched from a distance. One of them called out with a grin, "Hope you know something the billionaires do not." Ethan tightened the final cargo strap before climbing into the truck. Lily looked toward him with bright, curious eyes. "Do you?" For a long moment, he watched the morning sunlight reflect across the weathered steel of the forgotten engines. Then he started the truck and quietly answered, "I know that people usually stop asking questions long before the truth runs out of answers." As the old pickup disappeared beyond the salvage yard gates, nobody noticed that the greatest discovery of the entire project had never been hidden inside the engines. It had been hidden inside a single assumption that everyone else had accepted without ever looking twice. The 6 prototype engines filled nearly every empty corner of Carter Auto Repair, making the modest garage feel smaller than ever. Their steel surfaces still carried faint shipping labels and inspection markings from a company that had already declared them beyond saving. Outside, customers continued arriving with ordinary problems that paid ordinary bills. An aging pickup needed new brakes. A family minivan required a water pump. A retired schoolteacher waited patiently for an oil change. Ethan Carter completed every repair with the same careful attention he had always given his work, never allowing his curiosity about the engines to interfere with the promises he made to the people who trusted him. Only after the garage doors closed each evening did he turn toward the forgotten prototypes. Lily carried 2 cups of hot chocolate into the workshop and watched her father circle the first engine without touching a single wrench. "Are you going to take it apart?" she asked. Ethan slowly shook his head. "Not yet. But how will you fix it?" He smiled gently. "The fastest way to destroy a good machine is to repair something that is not broken." Lily quietly considered his answer before opening her notebook. She had learned long ago that every unusual sentence her father spoke eventually became an important lesson. Instead of removing bolts or disconnecting components, Ethan began searching through every document that had arrived with the engines. Thick engineering binders covered one workbench, while maintenance records occupied another. Thousands of pages described test procedures, laboratory measurements, software revisions, inspection logs, and failure reports written by engineers who possessed remarkable knowledge and impressive credentials. Hour after hour, Ethan read without speaking. Occasionally, he made small notes in the margins of his own notebook, drawing arrows between measurements recorded months apart. Sometimes he stopped reading entirely and simply stared at the same page for several minutes before turning back to compare another report. Lily noticed a pattern. "You keep reading the same numbers again." Ethan nodded. "Because numbers almost never lie." "Then why did everyone think the engines failed?" Ethan closed one binder and looked thoughtfully across the quiet garage. "Because people sometimes believe the explanation before they understand the evidence." Rain began tapping softly against the garage windows while an old wall clock marked another passing hour. Midnight came and went. The engines remained untouched. By the third evening, every technical report had been arranged into neat stacks across the floor according to production dates instead of report numbers. Ethan moved slowly between them, like someone assembling pieces of a puzzle that nobody else realized existed. Then something unexpected caught his attention. One calibration chart from an early prototype displayed a reference value that differed only slightly from every version that followed. The difference appeared almost insignificant, small enough that most readers would never question it. Ethan compared another report, then another. His breathing slowed. He opened a maintenance log from the final round of testing and quietly circled one repeated instruction. Lily leaned closer. "Did you find it?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the original serial number records copied from the identification plates at the salvage yard. Every engine carried the same calibration sequence after one particular software update. He leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time since bringing the engines home. "Everyone kept repairing the engines," he said softly. Nobody ever questioned the measuring system. Lily looked from the paperwork to the silent machines waiting beneath the garage lights. "So, they might not be broken?" Ethan closed the final binder with calm certainty. "If I am right, these engines have been trying to tell the truth since the first day they were tested. The problem is that nobody has been listening to what they were actually saying." Outside, thunder rolled across the distant Ohio sky, while the garage remained filled with quiet anticipation. For the first time, the forgotten engines no longer looked like expensive failures. They looked like unanswered questions waiting patiently for someone willing to ask one more. The following evening, Carter Auto Repair remained open long after the neighboring businesses had gone dark. A single row of ceiling lights cast warm reflections across polished tools and silent engines, while a gentle summer breeze drifted through the open garage door, carrying the distant sound of crickets. Ethan Carter rolled a sturdy workbench beside the first prototype and carefully arranged every notebook, calibration chart, and handwritten calculation into perfect order. Lily sat nearby with a sharpened pencil, ready to record every observation exactly as her father requested. "Tonight we finally touched the engine," she said with quiet excitement. Ethan smiled. only after we understand what it has been trying to tell us. Instead of removing major components, he disconnected the electronic control system and carefully examined every sensor connection against the original engineering documentation. One connector after another matched the specifications exactly. Fuel delivery components appeared flawless. Airflow pathways showed no signs of restriction. Compression measurements remained remarkably consistent across every cylinder. Each new test quietly eliminated another theory that had once supported the official conclusion that the engines had failed. Lily watched every measurement appear inside her notebook. "Everything looks healthy," she whispered. Ethan nodded without looking away from the instruments. Healthy machines rarely lie. He then carried several older laboratory devices from a storage cabinet at the back of the garage. Some had belonged to him years earlier during his engineering career. Others had been rescued from repair shops that no longer wanted outdated equipment. Piece by piece, he connected cables, sensors, voltage references, and signal converters into a custom calibration station unlike anything sold commercially. It looked unusual, but every connection served a precise purpose. Lily tilted her head. Why not buy the right machine? Ethan adjusted another cable before answering. Because I'm not trying to copy their process. I am trying to question it. Hours passed as he compared live sensor signals against the earliest factory reference values instead of the revised calibration standards used during the final testing program. The difference remained almost invisible, yet it appeared every single time. One tiny reference drift had quietly multiplied through every automated calculation until healthy engine behavior looked like catastrophic failure. Ethan leaned back slowly and closed his eyes for a brief moment. "There you are," he whispered. Lily looked at the computer display. "You found it." He nodded. Not the failure, the misunderstanding. Together, they carefully entered a completely new calibration profile based entirely on the original engineering intent rather than the corrupted reference sequence introduced during later software revisions. Ethan checked every value twice before connecting the engine to an external fuel supply and independent monitoring equipment. Silence settled across the garage. The old wall clock seemed louder than ever. Lily folded her hands together. Ethan rested one finger on the ignition switch, but did not press it immediately. "Remember this moment," he said softly. "Sometimes courage is nothing more than trusting careful work after everyone else has stopped believing." Lily smiled nervously. "Do you think it will start?" Ethan looked toward the engine with calm confidence instead of hope. "I think it finally has a fair chance." He pressed the switch. The starter turned once, then twice. For a brief second, nothing happened. Lily lowered her eyes. Ethan quietly adjusted one final calibration value by the smallest measurable amount before trying again. This time the engine awakened with a smooth, confident rumble that filled the garage without hesitation. There was no violent shaking, no smoke, no mechanical struggle. The steady rhythm echoed through the building with remarkable precision, sounding less like a machine returning from failure and more like one finally being allowed to speak the truth. Father and daughter stood silently beside the running engine, listening with grateful hearts as warm evening air carried its quiet song beyond the open garage door into the peaceful Ohio night, where someone passing outside slowed their steps, turned toward the sound, and reached for a phone. The gentle rumble of the restored engine faded into the warm Ohio night, but its echo lingered far beyond the walls of Carter Auto Repair. The man who had paused outside the garage remained standing beside his pickup truck for nearly a minute, recording a short video as the engine idled with remarkable smoothness beneath the soft glow of the workshop lights. He had spent more than 20 years driving heavy equipment, and even without formal engineering knowledge, he knew the sound of a healthy engine when he heard one. Before climbing into his truck, he uploaded the video to a local automotive discussion group with a simple caption. A neighborhood mechanic just brought one of those famous Hayes prototype engines back to life. Listen to this. By sunrise the following morning, the clip had quietly spread through several online communities where engineers, mechanics, and automotive enthusiasts debated whether the recording could possibly be authentic. Most viewers dismissed it as an old engine wearing prototype covers. Others insisted the sound had been digitally edited. Only one person stopped watching after the first few seconds because he recognized something far more important than the sound itself. Daniel Brooks leaned closer to his computer monitor inside his office at Hayes Mobility headquarters. He had spent 4 years leading diagnostic analysis on the very engine program shown in the video. Every curve of the intake assembly, every mounting bracket, every serial plate location was immediately familiar. More importantly, the idle rhythm matched calculations the engines had been designed to achieve but had never reached during company testing. Daniel replayed the recording several more times before enlarging the image frame by frame. Near the bottom corner of the engine, he noticed a serial number. His expression changed instantly. "That cannot be," he whispered. "Those prototypes have been officially removed from inventory only days earlier." He immediately accessed the internal disposal records. The numbers matched perfectly. 6 discarded prototypes, sold through industrial salvage. Daniel leaned back in silence, unable to reconcile the official engineering reports with the evidence now playing on his screen. He remembered the countless meetings where experts had agreed the engines suffered fatal design flaws. He remembered signing reports that declared further development economically impossible. Yet the machine inside the video sounded nothing like failure. It sounded exactly as the original design team had always hoped it would. Without hesitation, Daniel gathered copies of the archived technical files, printed the disposal records, and searched public property databases until he found a registered business address of Carter Auto Repair. Before leaving the office, he paused outside the executive conference room, where another product strategy meeting had already begun behind closed glass doors. Through the window, he briefly saw Victoria Hayes presenting future investment plans to senior leadership. Daniel considered interrupting, but quietly lowered his hand before knocking. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and one short video would never be enough. Instead, he carried the folder back to his office, closed the door, and made a different decision. Early the next morning, he drove more than 100 miles toward the small neighborhood garage, determined to see the engines with his own eyes before speaking another word. Back in Columbus, Ethan spent the day repairing ordinary family vehicles while Lily organized their growing stack of engineering notes. Neither of them noticed the increasing number of online conversations discussing the mysterious engine that should not have been running. Neither cared about internet attention. Ethan simply continued calibrating the second prototype with the same patience that had guided every careful step before it. As the afternoon sun settled across the quiet street outside the garage, a silver company sedan slowly pulled into the parking lot. A man stepped out carrying a worn leather briefcase, stopped for a long moment beside the open garage door, listened carefully to the steady rhythm of another restored engine, and smiled with the unmistakable expression of someone who had just realized that the biggest mistake of his professional life might finally have an honest answer. Daniel Brooks remained standing beside the open garage door for several seconds before speaking. The familiar rhythm of the engine echoed across the quiet workshop with a confidence he had never heard inside the research laboratories at Hayes Mobility. Ethan Carter looked up from his workbench, wiped his hands with a clean shop towel, and offered the same calm smile he greeted every customer with. "Good afternoon," he said. "How can I help you?" Daniel stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving the prototype engine. "I am not here about a repair." He reached into his briefcase and carefully removed an identification badge. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I was the senior diagnostics engineer assigned to this engine program." Lily glanced at her father with surprise, but Ethan's expression remained unchanged. "Then you know these machines better than most people," Ethan replied. Daniel smiled faintly. "That is exactly why I drove here." Silence settled over the garage for a moment as Daniel slowly circled the engine. He examined every fastener, every electrical connector, every mounting point, searching for signs that major components had been replaced. Instead, he found something unexpected. The engine remained almost completely original. Only the calibration equipment connected beside it looked different. Daniel crouched beside the control module and quietly studied Ethan's custom testing station. "Did you redesign the engine?" he finally asked. Ethan gently shook his head. "No." "Did you replace internal components?" "No." "Did you install experimental software?" "No." Daniel looked genuinely puzzled. "Then what exactly did you change?" Ethan reached across the workbench and opened one of the engineering notebooks filled with neatly organized calculations. He pointed toward two calibration reference charts placed side by side. "I questioned one assumption." Daniel leaned closer. Ethan continued calmly. "Every failure report begins after this revised calibration standard was introduced. Before that update, the engines behaved exactly as the original design expected." Daniel studied the documents without speaking. His eyes moved from Ethan's handwritten notes to copies of the company's archived test reports that he knew almost by memory. Slowly, he removed his own folder from the briefcase and spread several official engineering documents across the table. For nearly half an hour, the two men compared data in complete silence while Lily watched them carefully. Neither man argued. Neither attempted to defend personal pride. They simply followed the numbers wherever they led. Finally, Daniel stopped turning pages. He closed his eyes briefly before letting out a slow breath. "We never questioned the reference system," he admitted quietly. "We kept assuming the measurements were correct, so every result that disagreed with them looked like another engine failure." Ethan nodded gently. "When a measuring stick is wrong, even perfect work appears flawed." Daniel looked back toward the running prototype. "Would you mind if I verified your calibration myself?" Ethan stepped aside without hesitation. "Please do." Daniel connected his own diagnostic computer and repeated every procedure exactly as company protocol required. Except this time he entered Ethan's restored reference values before beginning the analysis. One by one, every sensor reading stabilized. Fuel efficiency exceeded expectations. Thermal balance remained remarkably consistent. Vibration levels dropped well below the project's original target. The display filled with green confirmation indicators that Daniel had spent years believing were impossible to achieve. He slowly removed his hands from a keyboard and simply stared at the results. Lily broke the silence with a quiet question. "Does that mean it works?" Daniel smiled with genuine humility. "It means your father did not repair a broken engine." He looked directly at Ethan with deep respect. He uncovered a mistake that all of us were too confident to see. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The steady hum of the engine filled the garage like quiet proof that needed no celebration. Daniel carefully gathered his papers before reaching for his phone. "There is someone who needs to see this with her own eyes," he said softly. "Because after today, no reporter in our company will ever tell this story honestly unless she stands exactly where I'm standing now." The next morning began like every other at Carter Auto Repair. Ethan Carter unlocked the front door before sunrise, swept the concrete floor, and placed a fresh pot of coffee beside the small waiting area. The familiar routine brought him peace because it reminded him that meaningful work rarely announced itself with fanfare. Outside, the neighborhood slowly came to life as delivery trucks rolled past and children waited for school buses beneath clear Ohio skies. Lily finished organizing the previous night's engineering notes while Ethan completed a routine inspection on a customer's family sedan. Nothing about the quiet morning suggested that the day would soon become one of the most important of his life. Shortly before 10 o'clock, 3 black executive vehicles turned into the parking lot and stopped in front of the garage. Their polished finishes reflected the morning sunlight so brightly that several nearby shop owners stepped outside to watch. Daniel Brooks exited the lead vehicle first, followed by 4 senior engineers carrying instrument cases. Finally, Victoria Hayes stepped onto the pavement wearing a Navy business suit that reflected years of confidence built through difficult decisions and extraordinary success. She paused for a moment, studying the modest garage where ordinary repair tools rested beside prototype technology that her company had already abandoned. Ethan walked forward with the same calm expression he offered every visitor. "Good morning," he said politely. "Welcome." Victoria extended her hand. "Thank you for allowing us to come." Ethan shook her hand warmly. Everyone deserves the opportunity to see the evidence for themselves. Daniel quietly smiled because the sentence perfectly reflected the man he had met only one day earlier. There was no bitterness in Ethan's voice, no desire to prove anyone wrong, only quiet confidence. The engineering team immediately began unloading precision diagnostic equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. High-accuracy sensors, laser measurement devices, thermal imaging systems, vibration analyzers, and factory calibration computers soon surrounded the restored engine. One engineer looked toward Ethan. "Would you mind explaining your procedure?" Ethan gently shook his head. "I would rather your equipment explain it." The room became completely still. One by one, the engineers connected their own instruments without using any of Ethan's homemade testing devices. Every measurement followed official company procedures, except for one difference. Ethan calmly handed Daniel the corrected calibration reference values he had independently developed. Daniel entered them without another word. Victoria watched every movement carefully while sunlight streamed through the open garage door, illuminating floating dust particles that drifted silently above the polished engine. Daniel initiated the first diagnostic cycle. Every engineer fixed their attention on the computer displays. Fuel efficiency stabilized beyond the original project target. Thermal performance exceeded internal projections. Mechanical vibration remained exceptionally low. Combustion efficiency reached levels none of them had previously documented. One engineer frowned and repeated the entire procedure. Another recalibrated every sensor before running a second analysis. The numbers returned exactly the same. A third engineer quietly disconnected the equipment, inspected every cable, then performed the complete test from the beginning using an independent instrument package. Once again, every result confirmed Ethan's conclusions. No one spoke. The only sound inside the garage came from the smooth, steady rhythm of the engine itself. Victoria slowly walked toward the prototype and rested her fingertips lightly against the cool metal housing. For several long moments, she simply listened. Then she turned toward Ethan with an expression completely different from the confident executive who had arrived less than an hour earlier. "We declared these engines impossible," she said softly. Ethan answered without pride or accusation. Sometimes impossible is only another word for something that has not been understood yet. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly before looking back at the engineers surrounding her. Every face told the same story. The evidence had spoken more clearly than any presentation ever could. Daniel quietly closed his laptop and smiled. "There is nothing left to debate," he said. The engine was never asking for a redesign. It was asking for someone willing to question the measurement before judging the machine. At that moment, an unexpected silence settled across the entire garage, and every person present realized that the greatest breakthrough had not been created inside a billion-dollar laboratory, but inside a small neighborhood repair shop where one quiet father had refused to stop asking honest questions. Over the following weeks, the 6 prototype engines were carefully transported to Hayes Mobility's primary research and validation facility outside Detroit, where teams of engineers prepared for the most comprehensive series of performance evaluations the project had ever experienced. Unlike the earlier testing program, every procedure now began with the corrected calibration references that Ethan Carter had patiently developed inside his small garage. He was invited to observe each stage of the process, but he spent as much time listening as speaking, allowing the company's engineers to verify every conclusion through their own experience. Victoria Hayes insisted that every department participate openly because she wanted the truth to be accepted through evidence rather than authority. Daniel Brooks coordinated the validation process with renewed determination, reminding every engineer that their responsibility was not to defend old conclusions, but to discover accurate ones. One engine after another completed hours of continuous operation, while rows of monitors displayed remarkably consistent performance. Fuel efficiency surpassed the original development targets. Thermal stability remained exceptional throughout extended testing cycles. Vibration measurements stayed well below the limits established when the project had first been conceived. Engineers who had once recommended canceling the program quietly exchanged thoughtful glances as every new report confirmed the same extraordinary reality. During a scheduled review meeting, one senior specialist stood before the entire technical staff and admitted, "We spent years trying to improve a design that was already capable of success. We never realized we were correcting the wrong problem." The room remained silent because nobody could honestly disagree. Victoria looked toward Ethan, who sat near the back of the conference room, wearing the same denim work shirt he wore inside his neighborhood repair shop. He accepted neither applause nor recognition. Instead, he simply continued writing notes inside the worn notebook that had accompanied him from the very beginning. His calm humility gradually influenced everyone around him more deeply than any speech could have. A few days later, Hayes Mobility presented the independently verified performance data to several long-standing technology partners. Representatives from multiple companies reviewed the engineering results, observed live demonstrations, and inspected the restored engines firsthand. One aerospace systems manufacturer became especially interested after discovering that the corrected calibration process could improve reliability for specialized power applications beyond the automotive industry. After several rounds of technical evaluation and business discussions, the company presented Hayes Mobility with an offer valued at $3 million to acquire licensing rights for the restored engine platform and its newly validated calibration methodology. The announcement spread quickly throughout the organization, yet Ethan's daily routine changed very little. On the morning the agreement was officially signed, he returned to Columbus before sunrise, unlocked Carter Auto Repair, greeted his first customer with a warm smile, and spent the morning replacing worn brake pads on an old family sedan. Lily swept the front office, organized repair invoices, and smiled every time another customer thanked her father for his honesty. That afternoon, Victoria quietly arrived at the garage without the executive convoy that had accompanied her previous visit. She watched through the open service bay as Ethan patiently explained a simple repair to an elderly customer, recommending the least expensive solution instead of the most profitable one. When the customer drove away smiling, Victoria finally understood that the remarkable discovery inside the prototype engines had never been the only reason this quiet man had succeeded. His greatest strength was the character that guided every decision long before anyone noticed his brilliance. She stepped into the garage carrying a thin leather folder instead of a stack of technical reports. Ethan looked up with the same calm expression as always. Victoria smiled warmly and said, "I believe the company has one more proposal, but this time it is not about an engine. It is about the future." Victoria Hayes placed the slim leather folder on Ethan Carter's workbench without opening it. Around them, the familiar sounds of Carter Auto Repair continued exactly as they had every other afternoon. An air compressor hummed softly in the background. A radio near the office played quiet country music. Through the front window, Lily greeted a customer with the same warm smile she had learned from her father. Victoria looked around the modest garage before speaking. "I have spent years believing that the most valuable ideas were hidden inside expensive laboratories," she said. "Now I know that wisdom is not determined by the size of the building where it is found." Ethan smiled politely, but said nothing. He simply waited for her to continue. Victoria opened the folder and carefully slid a single document across the workbench. "Hayes Mobility would like you to become our new chief engineering officer." Ethan glanced at the offer without reaching for it. The position included an executive salary, company stock, research authority, and the opportunity to lead hundreds of engineers across multiple development programs. It was the kind of career opportunity many professionals spent entire lifetimes pursuing. Lily quietly looked toward her father, her eyes filled with surprise, while Daniel Brooks stood nearby with a hopeful expression. For several moments, Ethan remained completely silent. Finally, he closed the folder and gently pushed it back toward Victoria. "It is an incredible honor," he said, "but I cannot accept it." Nobody spoke. Daniel blinked in disbelief. Victoria studied Ethan carefully, convinced she had misunderstood his answer. "May I ask why?" she said softly. Ethan looked toward the open service bay, where an elderly customer was waiting patiently beside an aging sedan. "Every afternoon," he replied. "My daughter walks home from school knowing I will be here. Every evening we eat dinner together. Every weekend we work on old engines, finish homework, and plan the week ahead. Those moments built the person standing in front of you today. I cannot trade them for a larger office, no matter how beautiful the view might be." Lily lowered her eyes, quietly overwhelmed by the simple honesty of his words. Victoria followed his gaze toward the waiting customer, who smiled gratefully as Ethan excused himself for a moment to explain a repair estimate that saved the man hundreds of dollars by recommending only the work that was truly necessary. She watched the entire conversation without interruption. There was no performance, no attempt to impress anyone. Ethan treated every person with the same quiet respect, whether they owned a billion-dollar company or an old family car with 200,000 miles on the odometer. When he returned a few minutes later, Victoria smiled with genuine admiration. "Perhaps I offered you the wrong position," she said. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Victoria continued, "What Hayes Mobility truly needs is not another executive. We need your perspective." She removed another document from the folder. "Instead of asking you to leave your life behind, I would like to propose something different. Remain here with Lily. Continue running your garage. Serve as our independent engineering advisor. Visit our facilities when your schedule allows. Teach our teams how to ask better questions instead of simply finding faster answers." Ethan looked at the proposal more carefully this time. The arrangement respected both his family and his values. He smiled warmly. "That is something I can say yes to." Daniel laughed quietly, with relief, and Victoria extended her hand once again. "Then we have an agreement." As they shook hands, there was no celebration, no photographers, and no dramatic speeches. Only a quiet understanding that the future of an entire company had changed because one father had refused to abandon the life that mattered most. Walking back toward her car, Victoria realized that the $3 million agreement had restored valuable technology, but Ethan's decision had restored something even more important. He had reminded everyone around him that true success is measured not only by what a person earns, but by what they refuse to lose along the way. Several months passed, and life at Carter Auto Repair continued with the same quiet rhythm that had existed long before anyone outside the neighborhood knew Ethan Carter's name. Every morning he unlocked the garage before sunrise, brewed fresh coffee, greeted customers with genuine kindness, and repaired each vehicle as though the family, depending on it, were his own. Between appointments, he joined engineering meetings with Hayes Mobility through scheduled video calls, helping research teams solve difficult problems by asking simple questions that many experts had forgotten to ask. The culture inside the company slowly began to change. Before any project could be canceled, every engineering team was now required to review its assumptions before reviewing its conclusions. Victoria Hayes often reminded new employees that confidence was valuable only when paired with humility. Daniel Brooks became one of the strongest advocates for the new process, openly sharing the story of how a neighborhood mechanic had taught an entire organization the importance of questioning the measuring system before judging the machine. Yet the greatest reward for Ethan never appeared inside a financial report or corporate presentation. It arrived one crisp autumn afternoon inside the gymnasium of Lily's middle school. Students from across the district gathered to present science projects inspired by real-world challenges. Parents filled the folding chairs while teachers quietly moved between display tables. Lily stood proudly beside a carefully built demonstration showing how a small calibration error could completely change the outcome of an engineering experiment. Instead of focusing on expensive technology, she explained how careful observation, patience, and honest questions often solve problems that complicated solutions could not. One judge smiled and asked where she had learned such an unusual approach. Lily looked toward the back of the room where her father stood quietly with folded hands and answered, "My father taught me that numbers almost never lie, but people sometimes stop asking questions too soon." The judges exchanged thoughtful smiles. Later that afternoon, Lily received the first place award for engineering innovation. As applause filled the gymnasium, Ethan simply clapped with everyone else, his eyes shining with quiet pride. On the drive home, the trophy rested carefully on the back seat beside a worn notebook filled with sketches and calculations. Lily looked out the window before asking the same question she had asked months earlier at the salvage yard. "Dad, do you remember when everyone thought those engines were dead?" Ethan smiled gently without taking his eyes off the road. "Edo." She laughed softly. "I guess they were never really broken." Ethan nodded. "No, they were misunderstood." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Golden afternoon sunlight stretched across the Ohio countryside while the old pickup truck traveled the familiar road toward home. The silence between father and daughter felt peaceful because it carried understanding instead of uncertainty. The following Monday, Carter Auto Repair opened once again at exactly the same time as always. The sign above the entrance had not changed. The tools remained well used. The waiting room was still small. Customers continued arriving with ordinary problems, and Ethan greeted every one of them with the same calm respect that had always defined his life. Some people measured success by titles, wealth, or recognition. Ethan measured it by promises kept, honest work completed, and dinners shared with the daughter who had never stopped believing in him. Long before anyone discovered the true value hidden inside 6 forgotten engines, he had already built something far more remarkable. He had built a life where character mattered more than applause, where humility outlasted success, and where quiet dignity never needed to raise its voice to be heard. After all, paper can describe failure, but it cannot always explain it, and those who keep asking honest questions often discover that the greatest treasures in life were never broken at all. They were simply waiting for someone willing to see their true worth.